So I think with that, though, that's all the announcements, and I think we're ready to go. So Chris, the other Chris Perko, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Then yeah, I'll have you take over and we'll get going.
Sure. All right. So our first talk today is going to come from Colum. Colum is a senior engineer at NX, and you're going to be talking today about using the power of NX to enhance Angular development. I have a couple of questions for you before you get started. Oops, I lost my notes. Sorry about that. Yeah, so this is a fun one because I also love Star Wars. If you could choose to have any droid from Star Wars, which would you choose?
Okay, so obvious answers an astromech like R2, R3, R5, BB-8, whatever, but they normally pull people out of sticky situations when they are trying to turn off tractor beams and Star Destroyers, and I don't see myself doing that every day. I do, however, speak to people from different countries and cultures and things like that, so I think a protocol droid might be the better option, but also not C-3PO because I would hurt him on the Sarlacc pit myself. But yeah, probably a protocol droid.
I have to interject here really quick because I think it was just yesterday they released a brand new, if anybody's ever played the Fallen Order, it's a video game, but there's a droid on there called BD1, and they just released this new remote control BD1 on, I think, somewhere on Disney, but he looks pretty cool. So I had to put that out there.
Nice. That was a very, very detailed answer. I was not expecting that.
I'm a massive Star Wars nerd. Yeah.
So you've also recently released Grammar Guru. What was the innovation process for the app before you got to launch?
Yeah, so Grammar Guru is a tool to help improve and plan your writing. So any form of writing, that could be written communication like emails, blogs, tweets, whatever, or it could be like writing stories, could be a student writing an essay or teacher planning lessons. But the whole concept of it came from myself and my friend who he's my childhood friend since like I was 4 years old, but he moved to Abu Dhabi to be a teacher, and when he moved we sort of fell out of contact a bit. So we had a call just to catch up and talk about it, and on that call he was mentioning about how he was teaching. I mentioned about how I had wrote a book and I was writing another book, but I was sort of struggling a bit with writer's block. And from that call we decided that we could make a tool that could help people with the power of AI. So like we all know the power of ChatGPT, but if you prompt it in a specific way, it can be really powerful. So Grammar Guru will basically have predefined prompts where you just click a few buttons, give it some text, and it will do all the work for you, and it will give you back a response. So it takes that whole trying to get the right prompt out of ChatGPT and just give you back what you need really quickly. So that was how we brought it from conception to launch. All the two of us having our own personal problems with things that we were trying to do.
Yeah, that's so cool. I think we're going to see ChatGPT used in a lot of different ways, and I think it's a really useful way to use it to help get somebody over through that block. Yeah. That's cool. Awesome. Well, congratulations on the launch, and I'll turn it over to you for your talk.
Yeah, let's see if I can share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see that okay? I was sharing the wrong one. Let's see. It's this one. Okay. So, yeah, as mentioned, I'll be talking about how to use NX to enhance your Angular development. And if anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Colum Ferry. I'm a senior software engineer at NX. I work on the Angular vertical as part of the NX core team. So let's get on it. Okay, I have a screenshot here of a workspace, but what sort of workspace is it? Well, most people here should be familiar with this. It's an Angular CLI workspace. It's what you get when you run ng-new. But I also have this workspace, which looks kind of similar, but also isn't. And this is an Angular workspace that NX has created. So this is created when you run npx create NX workspace and you choose a standalone Angular project. I've added some extra options there where you can choose to use standalone components from the start, add routing, and set up NX Cloud for your distributed cache. We'll compare these side by side and look at them in a bit more depth. and play a game. Spot the difference. If you look closely enough, you'll see that on the NX workspace, there is an end-to-end folder, there's an ESLint config, a prettier config, the jest config, and then a project.json file instead of the angular.json file. And really the only difference there is that each project in an NX workspace will have a project.json file, which has only its configuration in it, because merge conflicts on multi-thousand line JSON files is really difficult to try and manage, especially across multiple teams. So why is there these differences? Well, NX will offer out of the box Cypress for E2E testing, ESLint for linting, Jest instead of Karma for unit testing, and then Prettier for formatting. Okay, so we go back and look at this again. Other than those minor differences that I just pointed out, both of these workspace structures look very, very similar. You've got your config at the root of your workspace, and then you've got your source folder, which contains the source for your application. And if that's the case, then why would you use NX? Well, it's a live demo time. Actually, it's not, because when I was rehearsing this, I realized that I really suck at live demos. I also have a very bad broadband connection right now, and some of the commands I'll run will run npm install quite a few times, and I don't think we have time for that. So what I will say is that if you want to see some of these commands live, reach out to me on Twitter. I will try schedule a session where we can screen share, and I will talk you through the commands, what they do, and how you can use them to really power up your NX workspace or your Angular development in general. Okay, so back to what we have. We've got a familiar structure, as we are aware, but also the commands that we run in an NX workspace are very similar to the commands that we run in an Angular CLI workspace. So you've got your similar serve, build, and test, and instead of ng, you run NX. So if that's the case, why would you use NX in the first place? Well, the most obvious answer is that out of the box, NX comes with caching. It comes with local caching by default, but you can also turn on remote caching if you use NX Cloud. And as we can see here in the first screenshot, when you do your first NX build on your application, it will build your application. So it took 14 seconds there to build, and you got your output. However, the second time you run that command, if there's been no changes to the source code, then it will just pull the result from cache. So you can see it mentions in the output that the outputs match the cache, so it left it as it was. It took 45 milliseconds instead of 14 seconds to run the command. And most of the log output is the same. So if you're parsing that output for maybe like the main file name or something like that, it still comes out in the same structure so that you don't lose anything. But then if we think back to the structure that we just had, where we just have a source folder and all our source files are underneath the source folder, doesn't that mean that the cache will just be constantly invalidated, meaning the NX caching makes no sense? Well, it's a valid question because of that, but realistically, the short answer is no, not in NX. Because when we approach Angular development, we are aware of this concept of grouping our features into modules, like feature module approach, shared module, things like that, or more simply, just a domain-driven design kind of approach to our application development. In this screenshot, we can see a folder structure that contains an admin feature, a shared feature, a users feature, all nested underneath a source folder. And this is how we would normally approach Angular development with maybe an Angular CLI workspace. However, with NX, we would create this same kind of structure, except we would use libraries instead. And these libraries are separate projects, so they're not the same as the root project at the root of your workspace. It's not the same as your app project. They're completely separate projects, and they don't have to live underneath the source folder. They can live outside of it. Or if you really want it, because NX now offers nested project support, you could keep them under the source folder and get the same benefits. So we created the same structure here. We've got their admin feature, we've got our users feature, and we've got our UI, shared UI library. All these three are projects. So now on the another thing that NX offers, which is the NX graph. So this graph gives you an overview of your workspace, all the projects in your workspace, and how they depend on each other, how they're linked. We can see that we have our end-to-end application. We've got our application itself, NX Acme. We've got our three features, our three libraries. So we've got features admin, features user, shared UI, and each of those are depended on by the application. But you can see that there's no edge between any of the three sibling nodes, those children nodes. They're not connected to each other in any way. So what does that actually mean for caching? Well, it means that because projects have its own set of targets and there's like testing and linting, those are the default project targets that you get. You can also get more if you add Storybook or if you add component testing, things like that. But these are the default targets you get. And those targets are scoped to those specific projects. As you can see from the NX console output, shared UI has test and lint. And what that means really is that teams that are working simultaneously or in parallel that are working on separate features, if they only touch files within their own project, then they don't need to run the tests for any other project because they will not have been affected, at least in this workspace, because there's no edge between them. But what happens if there is an edge between them and you touch a file or you change a file in your project that is dependent on by another project, NX will calculate an affected graph. So this is a graph of the projects that have been affected by your change. So we can see here that because we made it, if we made a change in the admin feature, then because we made that change, it's affected. We can see that the application is affected. We can see the end-to-end application is affected. So that's our affected graph. And we can see that users and UI have not been highlighted because they aren't affected by the change that we just made. There's no connection there between admin and those features. So from this graph, we can run just a test target on the projects that we have affected. But NX makes that even more simple to do because it offers a command called the affected command. And this affected command will use that calculated graph to run the target that you provide a target name for the projects that are affected. And it can do this in parallel. So if we take a look at this screenshot, we can see that we ran the features admin test target and the application test target, and it only took 8 seconds because both of them ran in parallel to each other. When NX runs any task, it will check the cache, local cache first, or when it runs any cacheable task, it will check the cache first, and then it will check the remote cache if you've got NX Cloud set up. So that also applies when you run the affected command. So let's say, for example, our change in our admin feature was that we changed the name of an input to a component that the application uses, and then we run our tests. Well, we can see that the test for our admin passed because all it was a name change on an input. We can change that in our test when we're developing, but we might not have realized that that changed in the application, and that failed because it's trying to use a name that doesn't exist or doesn't match anymore. So when we go to fix that issue, we fix it in the application. We changed it to use the correct input name, and then we run the affected test again. Because the change that we made to fix this was only in the application layer, NX is able to read the cache for the features admin test target because it didn't change, which means the only task that was actually run here was the tests for the project to confirm that our fix worked. So given that, what have we got so far when we use NX? We've got a structured workspace, so we can structure it in such a way that we get even better cacheable operations. We've got our caching, which can be remote, where we can download our team's cache for projects that they're working on. And we've got an NX graph that we can use to visualize our workspace and do some extra workspace analysis, where maybe we've got 2 projects that are dependent on each other, or have a project that's been dependent on by an application that we didn't expect it to be dependent on. But what else? Well, one of the biggest benefits and most power that you can get from NX is the fact that it has a lot of integrations. And what I have here is just a handful of them. So we've got Cypress for both end-to-end testing and component testing. We've got Storybook, we've got ESLint, NGRX, Module Federation, Nest. We also have things like Tailwind, or if you were to install an alt plugin, Vite, React Native, things like that. But really, the real power of these integrations comes from the fact that they can be run with a single command because of the generators that the Angular plugin for NX offers. So you can set up NGRX with a single command. You can set up server-side rendering with Angular Universal with a single command. Storybook, Cypress component testing, or even Module Federation. All of these integrations you can get just by running one command in your workspace. And each of these also have additional options that you can configure it slightly differently to match your setup. But again, one command does it all. And beyond that, the real power then comes from these plugins, which offers even more generators. So NX itself offers official plugins that we maintain and support, but there's also a massive community building NX plugins for things like Playwright. And then also we have the ability to generate local workspace plugins where you yourself can write your own generators and your own executors that can be run by your team members. And that can be really powerful to enforce team-specific constraints, which most people hear the word constraints and get scared, but there's a good reason to have constraints when working as part of a team. And I can get onto that part later. So we look at the official plugins list. This is just a screenshot. It's actually not all of them either, but this provides you with the option to install more tooling and more integrations that you may need as you continue to develop. And it's so straightforward to actually do this because you're in an NX workspace. And again, same with community plugins. These are maintained by our community. Our community is awesome at maintaining these and keeping them up to date and providing new ones. I have a link to a full plugin directory of these, but you can see things like Playwright, FeedPress, Quick, Ionic React, Firebase Capacitor. So anything that you feel like you may need as you develop your application, as it scales, as it grows, there is likely a plugin for it with generators and executors that you can use without having to try and manually figure out how to wire up Firebase to your application or how to create an Electron app, for example, based on what you have. Okay, so back to local plugins and how these constraints can actually really help your team. Laura Newsom, she's Laura Newsom on Twitter, did a great talk on this at ng-conf, where you can create your own custom generators with your local workspace plugin. Because although the generators that NX and the normal Angular plugin offer are great, like I can say that because I build them, but also I use them. I use them for Grammar Guru, for example. They offer a lot of options. So like there's things that your team may never use, but is offered as an option that you, as a flag in the command when you go to run it. And that can get very difficult, especially for onboarding new members to your team or for people that aren't so familiar with it. So when you create a custom generator, what you can actually do is you can wrap our generators, because they're just functions that are exported from our package. And when you can then constrain what options are passed in, you can set some defaults for your team that make sense. So, or if you need to create new files for any system that you've got set up, any patterns that you're trying to follow within your team, you can configure all that within your own generator, and then your team can just call your generator instead of, say, our generator, with a limited set of options and things that, and you know that it's going to produce what you need and what your team needs as it moves forward and develops. So if you wanted to get access to all these NX benefits, but you're still in an Angular CLI workspace, how can you do it? Well, it really is as easy as a single command, as most things that we offer are. Just run npx nx init, and it will install the packages that's needed. It will create any additional files or modify any files that are needed. And if you say yes to nxCloud, it'll also set up nxCloud for you so you can get the distributed caching. And that really is, I think that I've screenshotted the output of it there, and it's just a matter of running npx nx init. But you might have heard that you need to be on the latest Angular version to migrate to NX. That's not so true anymore, because now we've introduced Angular LTS support, which is where we will support multiple versions of Angular with the latest version of NX. So right now we support Angular 14 and Angular 15 with the latest version of NX, but once Angular 16 launches, we'll also support that. And then moving forward, we will support Angular. The latest version of NX will support the latest version of Angular plus the two previous majors. So when Angular 17 comes out in October, November time, we will offer support for Angular 17, 15, and 16, and we'll drop support for 14. Okay, so quick recap of what we've got. So we've got a structured workspace where we create our features and our shared code and libraries, which enables better cacheable operations so that we don't ever run the same code twice, and we only ever run the tests and the builds on the projects that are actually affected by changes we make. We've got an NX graph so we can analyze our workspace and see any possible circular dependencies or see any projects that are being imported into the wrong place. Maybe they should be scoped by a separate application or a separate feature and they are being imported somewhere else. We've got the integrations with third-party tooling that we offer out of the box, but also We have generators so that you can just integrate those with one command. We've got a host of plugins that are available that you can get more integrations with. You can create your own plugins to maybe support your own external tooling. Maybe you've got some Rust code that you need to run, create your own plugin, be able to run it. Also to enforce constraints on your team so that they can actually move faster because they have less decisions that they need to try and make. And also Angular LTS support, where we support multiple versions of Angular so you can get all these benefits despite what version of Angular you're currently on. And if you needed a real world example of this in action and why NX is so powerful, well, Grammar Guru is probably a great example of it. I started off with just an Angular SPA for this in an NX workspace, but then I needed an API to call the GPT, the OpenAI API. So I was able to add a Nest.js project just by installing the Narwhal Nest plugin and creating a Narwhal Nest application with a generator. But then I also needed Cloud Functions. So I was able to create a JavaScript project, basic JavaScript project with an Narwhal.js plugin and wire up Firebase that way. And all three of those actually share code between each other, which is very easy to do with NX. You don't need to, it's just a matter of importing the code that you need onto the project. So from there, I also then needed server-side rendering. Again, it's just a nuller command run setup SSR. So I've tweeted about it. You can go find the tweet if you want to see more. But it just goes to show what NX can offer, even if you just start off with a very small application. So you can start off small, just your standalone project, and then as it grows and you need more features and more tooling, more integrations, NX is there to support you the whole way along. Okay, if you have any questions, I think there might be a QA session now. I'm not too sure. Or you can reach out on Twitter.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colum. Yeah, we have lots of questions, actually. I've chosen two. I'm going to ask you live here, and then afterwards you can go through and answer in the Q&A section
Awesome.
so we can keep track of time. So the first one, pretty interesting one that I even was thinking about too. What's a good place to learn best practices when it comes to organizing your folders and separating all your libraries out within an NX mono repo?
Yeah, so NX actually has a book that they've written that helps you decide that. Manfred there has the domain-driven design book as well, I think, or articles. So there's lots of resources out there that you can just Google, but mostly the idea is that you keep your features, you split it into domains. So you've got your features and then maybe the name of your feature, or you can go reverse order. You can go the name of your feature and then the features, data access, UI, and keep them separate right in that kind of direction. And that way then you put your components or your HTTP call state management and the data access. Any smart components you put onto like the features folder, and then any just dumb components or presentational components put in the UI folder.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Next question is, can the NX graph be extended to show a component graph within projects and libraries?
No, not right now. We do have a task graph that we've worked on so that you can see how tasks affect each other, where one project might depend on the task of another project, but digging deeper than the project level isn't supported just yet.
Okay, cool. That sounds like a interesting thing to watch for.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Colum.
No
Brooke,
problem.
I'll hand
Thank
it
you.
over to you for the next segment.
Yeah, perfect. The camera on. Cool. Thank you so much, Colum. And everybody, if you weren't in our last meetup, go check out Colum's new book. He's a published author. It's a book called The Blackstone Legacy, and you can find it on Amazon. So if you want a really good like fantasy style novel, go check that out. But Ady, let's have you come on screen. We'll get into our next talk.
Yeah. Okay, let's do it.
Awesome. I love your background, by the way. It's like the on air, the Angular hat. It's all really cool stuff.
Yeah. And I have this challenge where like you should not see a wire in this studio, but I'm almost there.
I would love to get rid of wires. Like everything behind my whole setup is just like it's big. And I've even got them like all with the, the little tie offs and everything. And
Forget about AI, man. 2023, we
Right.
don't need wires anymore. That's what we should do, man.
So true, so true.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I'm excited to have you here. So thank you for coming.
Oh,
But
thank you. Thank you for having me.
well, yeah, and you've had some exciting things going on though. So you were just given the status of GDE. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so
yeah.
much.
It's not earned easily. So, I think everybody would agree saying that you've definitely been a great contributor and we've appreciated just everything that you've done, but your positivity and your optimism. And that's actually one of the reasons I really wanted to bring you on for this segment in particular, because we're going to talk about something I think a lot of people are affected by right now, but it doesn't always look the same, right? Some people have gone through all of those terrible layoffs, or they quit their job, or maybe they're just looking for a new job and they haven't experienced it yet. But it could also be outside of work. There's always things changing, always things that just become different. And I think we get so used to being in our comfort zone and going through our day to day, but then all of a sudden things change. And again, that's why I wanted you on, because I think of, I don't know, when I think of someone who deals with change really well, I think Ady. So I wanted to tap into your brain and just get your thoughts and learn a little bit more about how you personally deal with change. And my hope is that other people can really pull some great knowledge and information and wisdom out of that as well. I think that would be great to start with your story and let everybody go through this journey of Ady as a developer, but as a human being as well. So I know you actually were born and raised in Senegal, I believe, right? Okay. Yep. So from there, what was your experience? Like, how did you get into programming? And then how did that bring you over to the States?
Well, yeah, I mean, thank you for that. And thank you for people who are saying congrats on the stuff. And yeah, I mean, we can have a whole episode about the road to GDE. I think Lara was telling me about that. But yeah, I'm from Senegal, West Africa. And I can say I always been a curious kid. And I never was too into like what was being projected in front of me, but how it worked. So, basically, and my poor mom. So if you bring a radio, I needed to figure out who was the voice behind the radio. So 500 radio later, I then found out that, it was transmitting from somewhere. And then that was the thing. That was my curiosity. Every single time something like aesthetically worked, I wanted to know how it worked in the first place. What was every single little bolt, like nuts and bolt that was involved in making it work. So, I was a kid that was destroying a lot of toys, and that curiosity, never really left me until today. And in 2000, after I had my high school diploma, I think around 98. And I stayed 2 years, just where I was just not really sure what I wanted to do. And then, long story short, in 2000, I end up in the US. And that was a huge change. We can start right there when we talk about changes.
Right. Well, and were you in software engineering at that point, or were you doing something else?
I knew I kind of wanted to do that. I mean, the cute backstory was in that curiosity when I grew up and I loved video games and I saw Pac-Man, I wanted to know how to build it. So I kind of wanted to be in in computers. I knew that I wanted to be in computer. I didn't even know that there was something called computer science. Everything was just called computers to me at that time. Yeah. So I knew that's the path I wanted to follow, but whatever shape it ended up taking, that was not planned.
So then where did Angular come in the picture from there? When did you get introduced to it, and how did that become what you wanted to focus on?
Well, the thing was, at the time, I mean, I've been developing now for quite, only in web development do you develop for more than 20 years and you feel like you still like suck at it, you know. But I've been developing for more than 20 years now. And then I was in PHP, Zen framework, and all that kind of stuff. And then when the advent of JavaScript came about with like, you know, YUI from Yahoo, then jQuery and everything else, you know, I was like that instant feedback from the UI, you know, and I'm like, man, this is something that is attractive to me. And like I always say, Angular had me at NG that 4, like the way that, like, you know, in the UI you could just, because HTML is not dynamic, we all know that. So, but the way that like you could just like do the data binding and then have like, you know, a list being updated right away. You know, so I think I started at Angular 1.2 and I never looked back.
Nice. Okay, so, and you said you were in New York, right? That's where you started.
Well, I arrived in New York, but
Okay.
like I was in California for the first 16 years when I was in the US.
Okay.
While I was in the, yeah.
And your family's still back in Senegal. You moved from New York to California. Then you end up in Georgia, right? Where you are now. And you also have a family and you've been having children on like on top of all that stuff. So
yeah.
Right. And these are all awesome things. And I think these are all things a lot of people can relate to. But this is where I really want to go back into what I was saying, like when I introduced this segment, was you handle it so well. And I think that it's a talent. It really is. It's a gift. I don't think I've ever seen Ady be upset or angry or grumpy. And I'm sure you have those days, but somehow just like now, like you're always smiling. So what do you feel like are some of your secrets, or maybe, you know, maybe secrets is the wrong word, but how do you feel like you handle change? Because it's not easy. So how are you handling it and staying optimistic and moving forward?
Well, the thing is, like, after a while, you just like figure it out. Okay, so when change come, and then the change that we're talking about is the one that was imposed upon us. Because when you have the choice to say, okay, I'm going to move from like one place to the other, or I'm going to go watch a movie today and stuff like that, that's the choice. But when, for example, all of a sudden you did not like, was ready for it, and then it started like raining on you and you did not get your raincoat out, you know, that is something that is affecting you directly, and that might be physically, financially, economically, and everything like that, but you were not kind of ready for it and it's imposed on you. So when we're dealing with those type of situation, either we can try to, sometimes it's not even, it might be, and I'm not talking in any kind of way like of threats or anything like that. Those are to be dealt with differently. But something that is going to affect you like at those levels, either physical, emotional, you have first to assess what it is, you know. And if you really think about it, the way that I have been so positive about it is anytime I'm confronted to those type of like life-changing moments, basically, it is an opportunity for growth. You know, the moment that I realize that, okay, I am being challenged because now I'm being pushed out of my comfort zone. Now, so what is the next zone then? Because like, you know, at some point you grow into your zone to the point where you are very comfortable. You know exactly what to do. You know, you can drive to work or like drive to wherever you like to go with almost your eyes closed. But all of a sudden, you know, like you are like now going to be a director of something like in the bigger city. Now you have to start again. Now, the thing is, going through that emotional process, you're like, okay, how does it impact me directly? What are the short-term things that are going to be impacted? What are the long-term things that are going to be impacted? And is there like the other side of the coin of that change? What are the benefits that might come out of this? You know, and if you look at it from that perspective, I mean, I was telling you, being in New York, the very first thing that happened to me in New York when I arrived at the airport, I lost my passport.
Oh, wow.
And when I lost my passport, you know, my English was just okay. And I'm at JFK, one of the busiest airport in the world. And I had to make a connect flight. that was a huge, and then like I was like, okay, do I like curl back and cry about it? Or now do I have to find a way? I did not care at that moment if my English was broken and stuff. I had something to do. I had to react to this change, and I had to make it a better outcome. So the thing is, like, at that moment when I decided like, okay, I needed to take care of this, I rose to the occasion. I was able to get it all sorted out. And thank God I went to a city in California where there was not a lot of people that was talking my language that forced me to get my English better. So that thing was like the outcome behind it. The challenge is it going to be a room for growth? So anytime I look at it from that, after like the initial impact, because we are all human, and then you meditate about it and you're like, okay, all right, if I overcome this, what is the new level for me? What is the next step? What is the next zone? So that's how, like, at the end of the day, I'm like, this is almost sometimes welcomed to like say, okay, something came and that's going to test me. That's going to see if I'm going to be able to rise to it and go to the next level.
I love that. I love it because a lot of it's that mind shift, right? Rather than focusing on what could go wrong, it's focusing on, like you said, that growth opportunity. What can go right here? How can I become a better engineer because of this, or a better person because of this? But
yes,
one question, just to kind of like wrap all of these thoughts together would be, I think initially when change comes, what I think is the hardest part to deal with is that fear that comes, the fear of the unknown. So how do you handle the fear and take that and really transform that into that positivity that you were mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, like my dad, God bless him, used to have this metaphor about like taking like the steps of a parrot, So basically, if you ever seen a parrot, they will like take one step and they will hold very tight before they go to the next one. So when you are in a new environment, in a new situation, in a new context, you're just not going to rush and say, like, I'm going to try to find out everything. You're going to go like baby step and say, okay. And that's the thing, like, just like assess your new environment, your new context, and then take those baby steps to get comfortable with. Right now, us in the Muslim world, we are like doing Ramadan. I've been doing Ramadan for like more than 30 years of my life now. But the very first 5 days are the hardest one, because your entire body has to shift in the way that like you were feeding it. It has to like adapt to this context. It has to adapt to your cue of like, okay, I'm not going to give you food for like the next 10 hours or 12 hours and everything like that. But after 4-5 days, it's like, okay, this is the new norm, So that is the thing. Do not rush into it. Change is going to come. You're going to have to embrace it. But, start with a, hey, hi, before you go for a full hug, because you don't know if that's going to be like fire or whatever else. So I like metaphor because like in the African like tradition, we use a lot of metaphor to teach, and to draw a mental model. So everybody call me Mr. Metaphor, but that's where the background is. So the thing is, just take the time to really assess like your new context, see who are the players in that context. When I got into the GDE program, I knew who I can go to, like, for help. And you were one of those persons, for example. I understood where my support system was. I did not abuse that support system, but I was like, I need to get this information. I need to find out about it more. And like, I have to get it through these people. So understand like your environment, have that intelligence of your environment, like my dad used to say, and understand like what is your new reality and how you're going to be like, what is your role in that new reality. Then start like moving, but move as slow and steady as possible.
Nice. I love it. This is all such really good information, wisdom. Thank you for coming on and sharing a little bit about your story, though. I think it's fun to learn about where you came from, but I'm sure everybody would agree with me when we say we love your metaphors. So if Mr. Metaphor is your nickname, I think it's well deserved.
And I like that one. Mensa is saying like, yeah, best not to lead with kisses. Yeah, I mean, at least if you have the sentiment that it's going to be reciprocated, yeah, go for it. But, start with coffee and like good talk, and then like assess your environment first. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, because you guys have been part of that process. More than like, And anytime you need to find out more, we can share.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I always love your talks and you sharing, but perfect. Okay. Well, yeah. Let's have Rob come on. Rob from this.labs.
That's me. Thanks for having me.
Yes, that is you. You're so welcome. So, and thank you. This was a segment that I'll just say, like, it's become really important to me, and I could only think of a handful of companies that represented this topic well, and this.labs immediately came to mind. So everyone, just to give you a little bit of context, Rob is here. He's from this.labs, and we're going to have a little discussion about how to build a winning team culture. And it's something that I think I'm going to probably become like this huge advocate for team, just positive work environments, because I've had the chance now to work at different companies, and it's a topic that has really become important to me, and not just as a junior developer when I was first starting, but I think this is something that's important across your career, right? And being able to have a team where you feel safe and you feel like there's a certain level of trust. I just don't think there's a comparison when it comes to like a team producing at its finest, or individuals putting out their best work and effort. There's no comparison between having that team that just is supportive, encouraging, transparent, honest, versus disorganized, a lack of trust, lack of support. So again, I just thank you for coming. I know this.labs, this is something that's really important to your culture, and I wanted to give the community a chance to learn from your example and to see what you're all doing there and how you've created this strong team. But do you want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit before I dive into the questions?
Sure. So yeah, my name's Rob Ocel. I'm architect and engineering lead at This Dot. I was one of the very first people to join This Dot when it became a consultancy, and I've been able to see it to grow to the size of the consultancy that is now. So I've been at the table for a lot of these decisions and hard-fought lessons that we'll talk about. But this has been a passion of mine since I started working, which is now, oh goodness, almost 16 years ago now. So, working on culture has been something that's been important to me my whole life. So I'm glad that similarly, Tracy, our CEO, shares that belief, and that, our team gets on board as well.
Yeah. And Tracy's great. She's such a good leader, but what a cool team to be on.
Absolutely.
I think, like, just to kind of start it off, to give everybody sort of the same base understanding here, like, how would you define a winning team culture? What does that mean to you when you hear that?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I have to say up front that we are not perfect, and we have made many mistakes over the years and continue to get better incrementally. So in some sense, having good corporate culture is a little bit like, say, working on accessibility in your apps or performance, right? You never have achieved it. You can only continue to improve at it. So I think it's important to understand that everything that we're going to talk about is incremental. And, we try to be both humble and at the same time give ourselves grace as we continue to do the best that we can. Now, culture in general, I think you have to have some prerequisites. I think that just needs to be table stakes. And I think some of them you mentioned during the introduction. People need to feel taken care of. Culture is not a substitute for poor pay or poor benefits. So that needs to be at the forefront of any conversation about culture. Is there anything that we can do to better take care of our people? I think people need to feel respected, as if they can speak up and people will actually listen. They need to have that sense of work-life balance so that they don't feel like work is already taking so much from them that they're unwilling to give anything back. And they need to have a sense of connection with their coworkers, which is really hard with remote work, but we'll probably talk about that. Then I think I was just trying to think what a good answer for this would be. And I think it comes down to having a good mission that resonates with people and then living up to it. So at this dot, our mission is to grow a community of current and future technologists around a common goal of learning and furthering web technology. So that was a lot, but let me break it down real quickly. Current and future technologists. So we like to center people both on helping current developers, senior developers, mid-level developers, as well as aspiring. So people that are juniors or are just trying to get their first job, right? So we focus on both of those things. And a lot of what we do focuses on both those groups, as well as learning and furthering. So we both want people to take new information in, but we want them to share outwards as well. This ends up sounding a lot like mentorship, and that ends up being what our definition is. So we're a culture that's really based in all facets on mentorship. And so I think you find your own answer, but that's our mission statement. And so we tend to find people that for whom that resonates.
Yeah, so I think that, and I do want to get back to the mentorship part here in a minute, because I think that's something that I don't see a whole lot of companies doing it like this dot does. So I definitely want to focus on that. But will you walk us through some of that? I know you said it didn't just start from day one. It's sort of a transformative process of figuring things out and building that team culture. But will you walk us through that process a little bit of how you've been able to achieve that strong, positive culture?
Yeah, so some of the ways that we're making progress on this, right? So the way we like to think of it is that corporate culture can't be forced, but it is deliberate. So you can't just hope it's going to happen. And so we try to create situations that are going to produce positive outcomes. So one of the very first things we did is create our weekly, what we call a water cooler. So we have a meeting on Thursdays where we get together as a group and not just share announcements, but like joke and play and celebrate the things that are going on, give people a chance to see each other, to hear with each other, to kind of be in community with each other. So that was one of the very first things that we did. We also brought in our kudos channel. So in our Slack, we have a kudos channel where we try to, again, promote people being thankful and grateful for their teammates, for their projects, for their accomplishments. And as managers, if that's not happening, because if there's lulls, we try to make sure that we make an effort to get in there and keep that moving. And you'd see kind of once you start to participate, everyone starts to participate, that kind of stuff. Other than that, like things like we have a coffee break room, again, with remote work, we have these sort of things that are maybe becoming a little bit antiquated, but this idea of the coffee break channel. And so we sort of promote people taking a break. And when they sit down to have a cup of coffee or to break up some time in between 2 blocks of work, we want them to do it in a video call with other people and talking about how their day is and interacting with each other and having those moments of connectedness. And so again, if people aren't saying that they're going to go sit in that channel, we get managers to go and do it. So I think, how do we do it? We do it by being very deliberate, by making sure that people are assessed, or that people are assessing how this is going, and then trying to do it in a way that is genuine. So we have different people that like to prime that pump or engage, because those are the things that resonate most with them. So one of our managers, Simone, loves the coffee break, so he makes sure they're always happening. Nice. And we have others that do the other things. And so what you'll tend to see then is that we put that obligation on our staff as well. So we tell them like, hey, part of your evaluation each year is going to be on how you're engaging with our culture and the community. Like, you have an obligation here to participate. Now, again, it's not forced. We want everybody to find their own way to participate, but that's created things now where like there's somebody that every Monday does movie trivia that gets very competitive and cutthroat. Mm-hmm. Somebody that does fake news trivia. So they'll give out like 4 headlines that seem like they should be fake, and only one of them actually is. And so we have a lot of fun doing stuff like that. People asking would you rathers. There's somebody that likes to host gaming nights and set up servers for certain games that people are playing, and they do that in Discord as well. So nice. You start to see people then taking it on because, again, it's expected, but it's not forced. We don't make them do these things. Yeah. Oh, I hope everybody's taking notes, because I just wrote down a handful of things. And just to kind of reiterate some of the things you pointed out there that stood out to me were, first of all, you have the management team that you're setting that example of, we want to get to know you. We're genuine about this. We're excited to get to know you as people. And I think that's an important part of creating
this kind of winning team culture, something that I think you're saying you do really well. I know my company excels at that as well, where the management and the individual team members are celebrating each other as human beings, not just as developers. And that's something that has become really important to me as well, is giving yourself those opportunities to spend time with your teammates and colleagues in a way where you can have fun. Because I think if you're only talking with each other about work, there comes a point where you kind of lose, I don't know, like when serious things happen, or when a bug comes up and you're all like rushing to take care of more serious, like job related issues. But if you don't have those experiences with each other where you've laughed and joked around and had fun, I think that those more heated moments become more challenging, because you don't have that fun history with these other people, right? And that sounds like that's what you guys are really doing, is you're building your Slack to have different forums, different channels where you can go and discuss fun things and games and getting to know each other in different ways. One thing that we do at Limble, which I really love, is, have you heard of the tacos that you can find on Slack?
I don't know. No,
Oh,
I
you
don't know
should
about this.
totally look into these. These are the
Okay.
best thing ever, because it's basically like giving each other a reward. And so if I were on a team, let's say my manager helped me solve a bug or something, and then I would say, oh, hey, so-and-so, like I would call them out in Slack and I would say, thanks, so-and-so, here's, 3 tacos or whatever. And then you literally give it a taco emoji, but it's an app that keeps track of how many tacos you've earned. And then your company can give like swag or bonuses based on, you can go and spend your tacos like money. It's fantastic. I love it, because it creates a great way for team members to go and celebrate each other. And it's your birthday, here's some tacos, or great job on that PR, here's some more tacos.
I like that.
So yeah, it's tremendously fun. But
I
okay,
will
so
say that celebrating each other is a big part of this. Like, you need to make space for people to be themselves. So in our offsites, we do regular show and tells. And so we have somebody on staff who's actually a really passionate astrophotographer. And he spent some time on one of our offsites sharing that. And, again, we have people from all over the world. So we have a developer from Hungary, and he loves eating pizza on every week. And so he created Pizza Pentek. Pentek is Friday in Hungarian. And so on Fridays, our whole staff, well, as many as like to observe the holiday, will eat pizza and then share pictures of it. And again, that's not just a silly, that's how that person contributes to the culture, but it's also embracing language and difference and things that make each other unique. So yeah, I agree. Anything that you can do to celebrate each other.
That's totally awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that part. That I love that. All right, so as a way to wrap up, though, I really want to give you a chance to talk about this mentorship program, because again, this is something that I think is tremendously important and yet highly underutilized in the development community. I think junior developers bring in a power and a force with them, but a lot of companies just see juniors as a burden and as extra work. And yet I think that they can bring in so much more than that if the company knows how to foster it. And you guys have this wonderful mentorship program, and I'd love for you to share how you're making that work, because really more companies need to be doing this.
So first and foremost, mentorship means a lot to us. So everybody in the company has mentorship. Mentorship's not just for juniors. So from Tracy all the way down to the most junior member of our staff, everyone has a mentor, and many people are mentors. But the program that you're talking about is our apprenticeship program. And so what we found out is, just through all the events that we host in the community, we came in contact with a lot of people that were aspiring devs, and they would constantly tell us the same thing, which is that even before this current climate, it was impossible to find work. And so at the same time, we were talking to companies through the consultancy that were saying, oh, we really want to diversify our hiring pipelines. We want to add more developers. We really want to find competent juniors, but there just are none. Well, how can these two things be true? You can't find anybody on one side, you can't find jobs on the other side. And so we said, well, what if we could kind of bridge that gap, give people their first chance in tech, at the same time that we're building relationship with these companies. And hopefully that person will then sort of graduate into working for that company. Now, a lot of times the way that we focus this program, there are a lot of deserving people, but we focus it on women in tech, usually second career developers. And what we came to find out is these are amazing women and amazing developers. And they come with so many skills that aren't traditional in juniors. There's so many years ahead in so many areas that if you're willing to put in the mentorship and the intense training to kind of get their code skills up, they can become senior developers at very rapid paces. So what have we learned? Well, at some level, we started hiring some of our own apprentices because we realized how amazing they were. And through that, I have realized that if your team can support mentorship at any level, because these people need support, but if you can support that level of mentorship, they will surprise you. And for a business, if you're listening to this and you're a manager, you listen, if you can be as mercenary as you want on this, there is value add for you here too, because it's not that you're mistreating people, but these will be your most efficient, cost-efficient developers that you're going to have on staff, because they're coming up through that junior pipeline, but they're going to give you skills. Now you're going to have to reward those skills, but you're going to be surprised at what you're not going to have to pay for the high ticket price of established architects as that sort of cost of, mentorship. What you'll get out is going to vastly outweigh what you put in.
Yeah, and they're hungry to prove themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Like everything you've said is just, I think, so valuable. And I hope everybody was taking notes. If not, though, this is recorded. We'll definitely, in fact, Preston and I will be making this an episode of the Dev Life podcast. So it'll be released as a podcast. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing about this dot. And thank you to Tracy and team and everything you guys are doing over there. But appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to bounce it back to Mr. Perko, and we're going to bring on Emma. So Emma, I'm going to promote you to panelist here, get you on, and we're really looking forward to Emma's presentation. She was very kind and stepped in kind of a last minute scheduling conflict, and Emma was really nice to step in, and she's going to talk about the state of Angular with us. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris and have him introduce Emma, and we'll go from there.
Hey, Emma, how are you doing?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome.
Yeah. Happy to have you on today.
Yeah.
Emma, you're a senior developer relations engineer for the Angular team. And so we're really excited to see what new features are coming out. I know everybody's very excited about signals. But before we get into that, I want to ask you just a couple questions. I saw on LinkedIn, it looked like you have a little bit of background with art. And I know we were earlier talking about AI with like ChatGPT. What are your thoughts on all this new like AI art that's coming out and how realistic it is? Oh, you're back on mute. Nope. I think I hear you now.
I think if I share a tab, for some reason it doesn't let me. So we'll figure that out in a second. Zoom Web is an experience. Yeah, no, I was going to say, I love it. I mean, I live in the Bay Area. I have a lot of friends at OpenAI, and I'm not unbiased on this. Like, I was an early tester for their product. And I think what they have is really cool in like the art space. There's a lot of controversy in that, and we could dig into the logistics of that. I highly recommend, if nobody here is following Danielle Baskin on Twitter, she has an entire account of like her explorations, and I think she's doing some of the coolest stuff of showing just how cool like the ideas are. Yeah, if anyone saw the fake Pope at Fashion Week, like that was AI. I think it's like fun. It's funny. Maybe like shouldn't be serious, but good for a laugh.
Yeah, definitely. Next question is, could you give some insight for people who want to become a Google developer expert?
Yeah, so I run the program. So I'm the person to talk to. Maybe I shouldn't say that. there's a million ways to do it. The way I think of the program is like, it is such an amazing thing that people take time out of their free time to spend more time coding, right? Like I don't do that. I like go play with AI and art and stuff. But so whatever you're doing to like enrich communities, mentor people, build community, write tutorials, help debug, like anything that you're using as a developer, if you're also creating and putting that out in the world and making the development space better, especially with Angular, like you're doing the right things. And GDE is one program that recognizes that, but there are many people doing it that aren't in that program. So,
Okay, great. So we won't put your email out there for everybody to start spamming you at all.
I mean, you can, but.
Well, I'll turn it over to you and we can learn more about the current state of Angular.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll let you know if your mic turns back off.
Yeah, we're going to figure.
Yeah, you're muted.
Oh, here. Okay.
There you go. All right, you're good.
Presentation has sound, and I don't know if it does. I'll be honest. I am stepping in for the lovely Simona Cotton, so huge shout out to her. And so I'm using some foreign slides, so we'll see. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. Like the intro said, I am on the Angular team. I help lead a lot of different aspects of sort of the public side of Angular. And the public side is all of Angular, right? It's open source. So thank you to the community meetup for having me. And without further ado, let's dig in and see how far I can get. So Angular is moving really fast. And there's a weird thing here. Angular is moving fast, but Angular is very opinionated. And I think the opinionation is one of our strengths, right? We know who we are, and we know the solutions we provide, and we try and provide that out of the box. But we also know that different developers have different problem sets, and you're using different parts of that solution out of the box, right? Maybe you don't have forms, so you're not concerned with that side of it. Or maybe your application is all forms. And so you're really tied into the opinionated form structures that we provide. And so even though Angular is a network of opinionated tools, people are using those in different ways. And so
hey, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're just getting a white screen. Oh, okay. Now we see the Angular logo.
Oh, weird.
Was that last slide just a blank white screen or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
We'll figure it out.
All right.
Zoom Web. I blame Zoom Web. But I think that what Angular is doing in 2023 and the future and what we have been doing in recent years is thinking about how the different solutions we provide work together to provide customers and developers the tools that you need to be able to successfully build your applications. And so just like tools on anything else, we're trying to make them flexible, and we're trying to build a framework that knows its developers and knows how developers use its tools to fit your needs. And so one of the first things we're doing is simplification. This is a big theme of Angular, and especially of recent features, and there's a bunch that fits into this. So probably when I said simplification, the first thing that came to mind was standalone. Standalone APIs are a way to reduce the number of concepts that developers need to learn, right? We removed this idea of modules. So you can now use standalone components, directives, and pipes, and modules are optional. And the benefit of that is that with the standalone flag, you're now writing your component and directly bootstrapping it in your application. So you can see that it goes from the code on the left, where you have this module and all this additional learning, to the code on the right. And the big idea here was simplification. Not necessarily removal of something, not like you no longer ever need these. It still works. It's still backwards compatible. Again, we know how people use and develop Angular, and we're not trying to remove things and break people. We're just trying to create a space for new developers, for new apps, for apps willing to migrate and move on to this. to be simpler to learn, simpler to dive into as a new code base, simpler to get started with. And one of the side effects of standalone is that components are now the smallest unit of reuse, right? So you can directly lazy load your component, and it simplifies things like your router config by quite a bit. So in the rewrite into standalone, we saw major simplification to other parts of that tooling opinionated network that Angular provides, of router, of forms will come up soon. But like, this was a change that really more holistically simplified not only the Angular code base, but also hopefully the code bases of everybody building with Angular. And we saw that it shaved off about 11% of the router bundle in moving to standalone. So some pretty major simplification, and simplification doesn't necessarily mean performance, but in this case it did, and that's really great. And in the past year, we've stabilized standalones. So we released them through an RFC and developer preview process. We moved to standalone APIs as a stable ecosystem that you could develop in prod with. And in version 16, which will launch in just about a month and a half, we're also adding tooling. So if you look at version 16, the RCs are out there already on NPM. You'll see that there's standalone migration tooling. And so in version 15.2 even, you have access to ng-generate Angular core : standalone. And so this generator converts your app to standalone. So it sets standalone to true. It adds dependencies to the import array. And then it removes unnecessary ng modules. So the migration considers modules safe to remove if it has no declarations, no providers, and no bootstrap components, and no class members. So it's not safe to automatically remove. Then it will add a to-do to your code. And then finally, it bootstraps the standalone API. And yeah. We also will be adding in version 16 a way to create a new app in standalone. So ng-new app name -- standalone will create an app that looks like this, where you'll no longer need to include the root module. And we've added the application configuration file so that you can fully write a standalone application from day one. So if you look at the app structure from version 14 to version 16, again, you see that theme of simplification where we're removing files, we're removing context. If you think back to the first time you did ng-new as a developer and you opened your project file structure for the first time and you were really overwhelmed, this is one of the things that we were doing to simplify it. Along with version 15, we also removed some other files that we noticed developers weren't using a lot, but really, again, in that theme of simplification, version 16's ng-new app is quite simplified and standalone-y. In the future, we will also be doing additional documentation, and we're really thankful to everyone who's provided feedback and input during the RFCs, during all of the stages of this journey in GitHub issues. We have so many developers already using standalone, and we feel like we've gone a long way from the initial idea of how to stabilize these APIs and simplify it to what we're able to implement today. And we're still working on implementing the best tooling available. So as you noticed, ng-new in version 16 is not standalone by default, but that's maybe something we'd move to in the future as we continue to, again, evolve the ecosystem, document, and make sure that there's full support for this in the future. Let's see. Standalone was one way to simplify Angular, but what it really did was also unlock new features. And I know we've heard that all before. I think like Ivy was like the greatest example of this, where we said like, we're doing Project Ivy, we're rewriting the rendering engine. And yeah, we're gonna do this, but it's really gonna unlock the future. And that unlocked standalone. And now we've done standalone and we're like, look at everything that we're going to unlock with standalone. But it's true, right? For example, if you have two directives in a component, And you know that they're always going to be used together. Let's say like you have a tooltip and the tooltip has a menu and it has something else. This is like a super common case, right? Applications have more than, or components have more than one directive. Standalone enabled us to create something. Okay. Well, you can't apply both directives using inheritance because TypeScript only allows you to extend one class at a time, right? You can't extend multiple classes. This is broken. Your language editor is going to get mad at you and TypeScript's going to say you can't do this. You could remember to always add both directives anytime you use the component, but that's really annoying, right? Like, who's going to write multiple directives and just assume you can do that? You could use TypeScript mixins, which allow you to inherit from multiple classes, but this is very wordy, and if I go through this code really fast, no one's going to read what I'm actually writing. Mixin has tooltip is a very confusing thing. And for a really long time, we've gotten the same feature request again and again, which is like, I have multiple directives and I want to be able to do this. And the answer was always that we didn't have a way to allow you to apply multiple directives to a single component. And that was because of the way ng-modules worked. And so by moving to standalone, we were able to introduce a new API to be able to allow you to compose directives out of the box for components. So in version 15, we launched the directive composition API. So that example before becomes something like this, where you define the host directives, you have that tooltip, you have that menu, and now you have a menu with a tooltip, and you can combine directives into singular components. You can also expose inputs and outputs and be more object literal with your syntax of what you want to control. And there's no limits to how many directives you can apply. I've seen as many as 5, but I'm sure you can do more. It's hidden by default. So inputs and outputs are hidden by default. You get to decide how that API is exposed to developers consuming that component. And everything else works. Dependency injection, host binding, lifecycle hooks, queries, anything that you were using previously still works with this. Host directives are executed before their host to allow for defaults to be overridden, and they're chainable. So you can compose directives through chains, which basically means host directives with host directives of their own. So you could have a component that consumes a component that has host directives. And they're injectable, right? The inject function works. You just can't have a circular injection dependency there. They only work in standalone because, again, the whole lead up to this was that standalone unlocked this. And they cannot be used, or components cannot be used as host directives. Obviously, it needs to be a directive. And you can have one directive instance per element. That is, you can't have a host directive with multiple directives of the same directive. How many times can I say directive? There's a video on this if you go to the link on the screen, or you go to the Angular YouTube channel introducing more of how we are using their directive composition API within Google as an example of how we expect this API to be used. And Jeremy does a great job explaining a good example of it. There's some additional improvements that we think also simplify the code that you're writing, how you test it, and how you debug it. Over the years, we've seen that people really want inputs as required. And while we'd expect all Angular developers to benefit from this, it's most useful for common component authors, so people that author components that are reused. Required inputs significantly reduce the amount of code you need to write. You don't have to think about those default cases, and then you're not burdened with sort of the unit testing of what happens when you get components that don't give those inputs, right? And what's really great is in 15.2, we landed required inputs. So these now exist and are available today. You can mark inputs as required. The compiler will raise an error if it's not there. And there's a new syntax on the @input decorator with an input array. They're inherited from a base class, and required inputs from host directives are exposed through the host. So when connected to that previous one, you just have to expose them. They also only work in the AOT, not JIT compiler. So you can see an example here where we have a required, we've added the ability to mark an input as required in both an input array and in the input decorator. So when you're using a directive without specifying the required inputs, the compiler shows an error. And yeah, I think this is really great. I would highly recommend going and playing with this one, especially if this is something you're excited about, or just honestly searching on Twitter. I think this has made quite a splash in the last week. There's a lot of fresh tweets on this one. We've also made significant improvements to the router that span accessibility, testing, performance, developer experience. Again, we reduced the size of it by 11%. We streamlined the page titles, so you can now add the title directly as an attribute within your route definition. This is great for accessibility. There's a video on our YouTube about this one as well. You can also manage ARIA current. So you can actually directly within your router link define ARIA current. And we added test helpers that allow you to trigger navigation and test, plus functional router guards. I think that's a lot, and I'm trying to go fast just to reach the end because I know we're at time. But if you're interested in any of these, again, I think this is recorded and there's PR links on all of these with more details. We're also working on developer workflow simplifications, so ways to quickly iterate through your ideas. One of the larger ones is to follow the wider ecosystem shift towards native tooling that results in faster build times for developer and production environments. Currently, Angular uses Webpack as a bundler, and then we use ESBuild for code optimizations like function inlining, Terser. We further code compress. And while this configuration is performant, with recent evolutions of tooling and the way that the tooling environment is going, especially with things like ESBuild, we think we can do better. And so last year we introduced experimental ESBuild support for ng-build, which compiles pure ESM output and includes support for watch mode in developer workflow. But we're continuing to work on closing the gap between Webpack and ESBuild to make sure that we can make ESBuild stable. On the left hand, I'm running ng-build in a project using current stable pipeline. And on the right side, you can see that we're using ESBuild. The first project takes 7.1 seconds to build, and the ESBuild project takes about 3.6 seconds. So almost a 50% reduction there. And in fact, it's actually 57% faster cold builds. So ESBuild is seeing a lot of improvements, and we have additional features in v16 that aren't in these slides that actually move this metric even further. So build time is definitely a large target of the tooling team. You can configure this today by adding it in your angular.json file and replacing Angular browser with Angular browser ESBuild if you want to try it out. And again, just look for that feature parity. So that's the update you're making. And if you are using the experimental feature, please send us feedback, especially in GitHub issues. We're actively benchmarking these right now, especially leading up to a release where we're really trying to make sure we have a performant solution for you. Over the last few months, we've also collaborated with Chrome DevTools, specifically on their Aurora team, which is focused on core web vitals and making Angular performant, especially among DevTools and all that jazz. One of the things is ignore listing code that you didn't write, right? So you used to get in your source code when you were trying to debug code, code that you didn't write, like code that was in node modules, code that you're importing from somewhere else. And so when the error you get in your Chrome DevTools is like, hey, this code doesn't work, and you click into why, and you're getting some source code from some package that you never authored that you're importing that you didn't even know Angular relied on, that's not super helpful because you can't change it. Or you can, but you'd have to like open source contribute something like way up the pipeline and then wait for them to merge it, and then it's on NPM. It's just like, that's not really what we're looking to do when we debug our code. And so we worked with Chrome DevTools, and we actually ignore list code that you didn't write. So DevTools has introduced an extension to source maps called Google Ignore List. And this extension is used to identify third-party sources such as framework code, bundler-generated code, code from just anywhere other than the code that you're actually writing and debugging. And when a framework uses this extension, authors automatically avoid code that they don't want to see, and you don't step through it when you're using their debugging tools. So in practice, Chrome DevTools automatically hides code identified as third-party in stack traces, source tree, quick open dialog, and improves the stepping and resume behavior in the debugger. As a result, you have more relevant stack traces, so you can see all call frames of the stack trace from your application. And you can always click show more frames in link if you actually do want to dig into that third-party code. The same applies to call stacks if you do want to see that, but realistically, again, in terms of simplification, and especially if you're new to these debugging tools, it's really nice to see code that you're familiar with and that you can go debug and change. And again, with all these improvements, we're really trying to meet developers where they are. We're trying to simplify, we're trying to reduce friction, and we're trying to build great experiences for you to build great apps. And ultimately, the goal is to put the user first and build faster apps by default. Again, with Core Web Vitals, we want you, Web Vitals help quantify the experience of your site and identify opportunities to improve. They do that with metrics that you might be familiar with, largest contentful paint, first input delay, cumulative layout shift. And the team doing this is called Aurora. And over the past few years, we've partnered more closely with Aurora to investigate and improve Core Web Vitals for Angular projects out of the box. One of our most recent focuses has been LCP, or largest contentful paint. And we see that 71 to 79% of pages that had LCP elements were an image. So given this data, we wanted to make it easy to adopt performance best practices for loading images, specifically intelligent lazy loading, prioritizing critical images, optimizing configuration for popular image tooling, and built-in errors and warnings when what you were doing wasn't performant with those images. And so we did that with something that we introduced called an image directive, where you can change the source of your image that you're pointing to ng source. And all that ng source is doing is bringing you all of those improvements out of the box with something called the Angular image directive. So as part of V16 or V15, we released the ability to automatically generate the image source set so that you can download it. And a ton of other things out of the box that allow you to, again, reach those best practices that we worked with on Aurora through a directive that Angular as a framework is providing to you. You can learn a lot more about how to actually use that directive in our developer guides on the Angular docs, but it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're doing anything that uses a lot of images or you're seeing LCP as something that you want to optimize for in your Web Vitals. Looking forward, there's a few more little explorations that we have in mind for the team. We're improving documentation, we're improving SSR, we're introducing reactivity with signals, and there's a lot more. I would highly recommend looking out for the stuff the team will start releasing around V16 in the next month. And yeah, there's a lot to look forward to. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. Sure you guys will release even more cooler stuff by ng-conf to surprise everybody. But I know we're kind of short on time, and we're not gonna have time for questions today. Do you have, what's the best way for people to reach out and ask you questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Send me anything on Twitter. I'm at Twersky, my last name, replace the Y with an E. Or just look at the Angular Twitter and I'm probably there. And yeah, I'm always happy to answer questions. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma.